Hello, everyone. Thank you all for being here. It is my great joy, honor, and pleasure to be here with you on another No Small Talk Sunday. It never ceases to amaze me the depth and the breadth of new discoveries in physics and quantum physics and biology and consciousness. And it's a never-ending stream of multiple layers that continue to stream through my news feeds. And many of those, which tend to be even the most mind-blowing ones, are the ones that break through a whole new sort of subterranean, library of Alexandria of information about the things that I thought I already knew about, the brain and brain waves and consciousness and how the body is put together. Anything that I might choose as a subject, when I began to research it out, it just opens up, corridors of information that I had no idea about, on subjects and things that I am very well versed on, more than most people on the planet. So there's there's a narrow. I recognize that there's a lot of smart people in the world, and there's a lot of very smart physicists way beyond where I am at. There are there are some very intelligent doctors and holistic therapists, and there's extremely talented musicians. Part of my uniqueness is to draw a series of those together. Being a doctor and a composer and a sound engineer sort of put me in some interesting, special little niche place in the universe. So I can have discussions with, psychiatrists and medical doctors and holistic therapists and acupuncturists and chiropractors and musicians and composers and sound engineers. But it's rare to find someone who's got them all folded together so I can have that kind of conversation. One of the few people on the planet that I know that I can have that level of conversation with is my son, Shay, who's a sound engineer and a musician and is a CEO that runs all my companies and is deeply versed in all of this stuff. So with a continual reawakening and humble regard for the truths that continually pour out of the universe, I revisit a concept that I thought I knew about. And that's, what we're going to be discussing today when we talk about the Thalamic neuron theory. Now, I have talked about the thalamus and mentioned it in the past on other live streams. But when I went to school 50 years ago, brainwave frequencies were beta, alpha, theta, delta, and that's all there is, until I discovered epsilon and broke it out of its cage. And then all of a sudden the world went loose, and now there's gamma and default mode network and, all this other stuff. At that time, the thalamus was sort of the sensory switchboard, the grand central station in the center of the brain that pulled, signals from all over the body that come up the spinal cord, all the sensations that you could have, heat and pain and vibration sense and position sense and mechanoreceptors and all the rest of the stuff that's in the body. Trillions of sensors firing information up all kinds of tracks in the spinal cord, straight up through the brainstem into this grand central station, two giant hubs, one on the right, one on the left, which is a very complex organism that routes the signals out into the cortex and the gray matter of the cortex, and then decisions are made there that send signals back out into the body to do things in the body, make my arms and legs move, that is filtered and synapsed into the hypothalamus. So there's the thalamus hubs, and underneath it in the middle is the hypothalamus, and that triangle forms the central core of the central nervous system, the CNS. The central nervous system is brain, spinal cord, and this triangle as it's at its core. Comes down the spinal cord, inside the vertebra, and once the nerve endings, the nerves come out from the spinal cord in openings between each vertebra, kind of stuff that chiropractors work on. Those nerves come out, some of them synapse into different postganglionic neurons and go to the organs. The vagus nerve comes straight down outside the brainstem, not in the spinal cord, and goes straight to the organs. But once those nerves come out of the spinal cord, that's called the peripheral nervous system, the PNS. So the CNS, the central nervous system, brain, brainstem, spinal cord, the triangle, two thalamus hubs and the hypothalamus. The CNS versus the PNS. The CNS is control structures. PNS is after it's out, sort of cables carrying information. Also, when I was in school, I learned that the gray matter on the outside of the brain sort of made the decisions, and the white matter was cables that carried the information back and forth. Now we know that that's not exactly true either, that the cables, the white matter that carry information back and forth, is unimaginably more complex with all kinds of different cell types, particularly astrocytes, that now have been discovered to be active participants along with the gray matter in making decisions about which neurons are going to fire or when they're not going to fire. So all of a sudden, white matter has a control aspect about what happens with gray matter, and they're communicating back and forth. So really, it's way more complex, and a lot of these decisions are not just gray matter decisions, right? And then, as we said just a couple of live streams ago, now we know that there are 6 layers of neurons. Now, I learned that in school, but it was just like a fact. There are 6 layers of neurons, but these latest discoveries are that each of those 6 layers of neurons are connected together per layer, and then connected together between layers, and each layer is generating specific types of brain waves. Slower and slower brain waves tend to be down at the 6th layer, and faster brain waves tend to be up at the top layer. So gamma, hypergamma, lambda would be up at the top. Delta in default mode and epsilon will be down at the bottom layers. As time went on, we started to realize that the thalamus itself is the mediating factor of making the brainwave neurons fire at different speeds. It's coming from the thalamus and coming from other structures coordinated through the thalamus. For instance, theta brain activity, which I associate with emotional processing and emotional healing, during dreaming sleep, which happens in theta, because dreams are emotional. You're being chased by the boogeyman you think is real. And now it turns out that theta brain activity originates in the hippocampus, the limbic system, the emotional control structure that wraps around the hypothalamus, hardwired into the hypothalamus. So that even solidifies my thinking about the fact that theta is deeply associated with emotions and emotional traumas and emotional healing, because the hippocampus is emotional memories. The amygdala, out of the end of that, is emotional processing that's happening now. But those memories of emotions and emotional traumas and the good things that happen to you in your life are stored in the hippocampus, and the hippocampus is what's making theta brainwaves. And its connection through the hypothalamus into the thalamus and out to the cortex, driving brainwave oscillations, right, in the theta range, somewhere between 7 or 8 hertz down to about 4. And other brainwave frequencies are generated where they come from in different brain structures. We'll cover that in more depth in another broadcast. Today, we're not talking about that specifically. But the thalamic neuron theory itself has also evolved. And as I was discovered when I began to explore it for this broadcast, there's a whole, levels and tiers of new information about the thalamic neuron theory and what it means that I wasn't even aware of. So, we start with a PubMed article, Thalamic Neuron Theory, the theoretical basis for the role played by the central nervous system, the CNS, in the causes and cures of all diseases. This goes straight to the heart of the processing and techniques that I've developed called biotuning that use sound frequencies to affect autonomic nervous system function, which is part of the triangle at the center of the CNS. The thalamic neuron theory postulates that the central nervous system is involved in all disease processes, as the CNS not only processes incoming physical and chemical information from the periphery, it also sends out physiological commands to the periphery in order to maintain homeostasis for the entire body. And homeostasis, in my opinion, is the key to healing. That when modern medicine says that, and the scientific community worldwide agree that stress is the ultimate cause of disease, what they really mean by that is stress handling ability. The lack of stress handling ability in the autonomic nervous system and the inability to achieve stable homeostasis is the cause of disease. And that statement right there is really the big picture of the holistic health idea that all holistic practitioners ascribe to, that there is an inherent biological organic intelligence that knows how to grow my body out of 2 cells, differentiate all the tissues based on some blueprint, and then make all those tissues run on automatic under the hood without me having to think about it. And the relationship between small mind and big mind, so to speak, is the relationship between my cognitive consciousness in an ordinary state, where we are right now, and I'm talking to you and you're listening to me. Most of our rational cognitive experiences in our ordinary life that we have memories of for our whole life is this small mind up here that doesn't have a clue what's going on down here because they are disconnected on purpose. but they are connected, and they do influence each other. You know, my belief systems that I carry up around in here filters down into the autonomic nervous system, and the autonomic nervous system begins to alter its functioning based on my belief patterns, right? So if I have a internal dialogue of negative self-talk, then that filters down into the big mind. The big mind begins to alter its functioning to correspond to these belief systems. And we see that, I would see that in my clinical practice all the time. There would be people who come in who are in very difficult condition. They've been to all kinds of medical systems, all kinds of other holistic practitioners, and they can't find an answer. And now they're beginning to develop self-defeating belief systems, losing hope. One of those systems is, you know, no matter how many doctors I see, I'm never going to find the one for me. I'm never going to find an answer. It's just downhill from here. There's no hope for me. Things like that. And so one of the primary duties that I had as a holistic practitioner was to begin to chip away at that self-image and reframe it and transform it by giving this person hope. And part of how I accomplished that was by educating them into how their body works. Instead of having a big mystery here and I don't know what to do and I'm dragging my body around to different people who supposedly do know, and obviously they don't because nobody can help me, and now I'm losing hope. They come to me and I'm going to have to tell them, here's how your body works, so that this part understands what's going on down here, so it's not a big scary mystery, and that there's only a certain number of things that can go wrong with the system. It's either got to be this and this and this, or a combination of this and this and this. Those are the possibilities on the table. It's not the big mystery that everybody puts it out to be. You know, part of getting in touch with that is realizing that the connection between this and this, that's the thalamus. The thalamus is the master switchboard also between the rational thinking small mind and autonomic big mind. It stands between those two worlds, and it balances this whole thing together. The thalamus are these two sort of globular structures. There's one on the right and one on the left at the very top of the brainstem before it becomes the cortex around it. At the top of the food chain, except for the cortex itself. It's a very complex structure, these two structures here. And as you can see, they've got all these different, very complex divisions, and each one of these divisions has very specific things that it's all supposed to do. You know, it's sort of looked upon as the sensory gateway between signals coming from the body and going up into the cortex of the brain. The official definition: the thalamus is a structure located deep within the brain and is often described as the brain's sensory relay center. All sensory information except for smell, which now I'm going to have to go trace that down and find out why is smell not involved. Except for smell, all sensory information except for smell passes through the thalamus before being processed in the cerebral cortex, where it is interpreted and integrated. The thalamus thus plays a pivotal role in sensory perception and awareness, allowing selective filtering of sensory information. Here's a closer view of the complexity of the thalamus. And remember, there's two of these. This is just one side here. There's two of these. They also link together like two hemispheres of the brain. they act independently, routing information to the right and left cortex. So you can see this color-coded thing here is like this yellow zone, the anterior nuclei, is controlling this section, or sending signals out to this section, receiving signal back through this section, through this area. This red area here that is divided into two parts controls these two zones, sensory cortex and motor cortex. Motor cortex, sensory cortex. This little purple zone here, the visual cortex, is this. Anyway, you can see how this goes. All these striations, all these cables that carry information sprayed out from the thalamus out into the cortex, links areas of the cortex that have specific functions into this master control center switchboard. Now, awareness itself, cognitive functions in the brain, and consciousness awareness is also modulated through the thalamus, because consciousness requires all of the information coming from all my senses integrated into through the thalamus into the cortex and back and forth again with specific connections into the hypothalamus that synchronize up conscious experiences up here in the cortex and unconscious experiences in the big mind underneath, all of it integrated together. And the official version at present between thalamic neurons and consciousness, the thalamic neuron theory posits that thalamic neurons are critical for maintaining consciousness. They help regulate the flow of information between the cerebral cortex and sensory systems in the body, influencing alertness and attentiveness and consciousness. Thalamic neurons synchronize brainwave activity across different regions of the brain, which is crucial for unified conscious experiences. For instance, rhythmic firing patterns in the thalamus are believed to be linked to different states of consciousness, waking, sleeping, meditative states, things like that. We're talking about oscillations in the different divisions of the thalamus are what is the origin of brainwave rhythms in the brain at certain speeds, and we know that certain speeds of brain rhythms are associated with consciousness, different states of consciousness, beta, alpha, theta, delta, all modulated from the thalamus. Now, I covered in a past broadcast the fact that one of the prevailing new theories about EEG and electrical discharges from the neurons at certain speeds and waves is actually not an electromagnetic pulse coming from the thalamus, but a pressure pulse coming from the thalamus in rhythms. Sound wave rhythms, pressure rhythms coming from the thalamus is putting pressure on microtubules that populate everything, populate all the cells that make up all of the transmission fibers that connect the thalamus into the cortex, that invade all of the gray matter neurons, and all of their axon connections are chock full of this network of microtubules that have piezoelectric properties. They're crystalline lattice structures that in nature are the only structures in nature that when pressure is put on them, they generate electrical pulses. So from that standpoint, pressure pulses coming from the thalamus into different areas of the cortex cause different brainwave firings as piezoelectric discharges from microtubules that have sound pressure waves pushing on them in certain rhythms from the thalamus. Put that in your pipe and smoke it. You know, it's really sort of unimaginably complex. This is the brainstem here, and this is the spinal cord down here. So information comes from all over the body, up the spinal cord tracts, into the brainstem areas, pons, medulla, cerebellum, where we have neurons for vibration sense and taste and smell and sight and hearing, and all that are routed up through the upper brainstem areas into the thalamus that link all of this information directly into the hypothalamus, and then in radiating pathways goes out to highly specific areas in the cortex where that's all processed in higher order neurons in the gray matter. Decisions are made, signals are sent back down into the thalamus, where it routes out to the correct places in the body, or the organs, or the hypothalamus that goes to the organs, and things like that. This is the big giant switchboard that's coordinating everything that's happening in the central nervous system. Profound. And as I said before, here's the thalamus, right? This one of these round structures on either side, the right and the left. In the center is a single hypothalamus, hardwired and connected into this. Under that, wires come down into the pituitary gland, hardwired into the pineal gland, which is over here. There's a heavy influence of the reticular activating system in the upper brainstem, where you will remember the reticular activating system paralyzes the body during REM sleep stage, so you don't get up and act out your dreams. But it has many other duties, but we're not here to talk about that today. And the hypothalamus has all these little organelles, and the pituitary, that control all the organs and the glands in the body on an automated program that is taking into account information coming from the body and all the sensory information from the body and the organs and the glands into the thalamus, where it's coordinating and disseminating all that information in a sort of a two-way pathway, arrows going this way and this way, in all the areas of the cortex, back to this hub. The thalamic neuron theory postulates that the central nervous system is involved in all disease processes, as the CNS not only processes incoming physical and chemical information from the periphery, it also sends out physiological commands to the periphery in order to maintain homeostasis for the entire body. Inherent in its capacity to learn and adapt, or to habituate, is the CNS's ability to learn to be sick. This is pathological habituation. The central nervous system, over time in chronic illness, will now begin to read this new abnormal functioning as the correct functioning by looking in certain deranged central neural circuitries leading to chronic disease states. So this concept of the very thing that we see with the real-time heart rate variability that I've described before and shown on past live streams, where we can visibly see a live feed from the autonomic nervous system on a computer screen of the sympathetic and the parasympathetic fluctuating moment by moment, updated every second. So we can see that if it can achieve homeostasis or not, or if it's stuck in this runaway fight or flight response, which is the new set point, which is abnormal of the functioning of the CNS. And that is what's recognized worldwide in modern medicine and the scientific circles as the ultimate cause of disease, the inability to achieve homeostasis and the CNS running a wrong program, so to speak. What's called a habituated, how do they put that? It's inherent in its capacity to learn and adapt, to habituate. CNS ability to learn to be sick. Pathological habituation is what that's called. And for us to be able to manipulate the function of the autonomic nervous system with a precisely tuned sound wave sounds like the stuff of science fiction, straight from Star Trek. The fact that you can use this live feed with a sympathetic stuck in an on position and run a variety of sound frequencies, untuning themselves through your body in a sweep until you find a frequency that hits the reset button and it collapses that habituation, is a profound innovation and a completely new approach to understanding health and disease and what to do about it. PubMed, Thalamic neuron theory. Meridians equals DNA, the genetic and embryological basis of traditional Chinese medicine, including acupuncture. Now, as we're going to see here, another big mind blower. The thalamic neuron theory traces itself back to the development of the fetus in embryology. And as consciousness is reading the blueprint and differentiating all the tissues into their respective parts, there is a blueprint pattern that is superimposed on the body, that the body is growing its cell networks to conform to this sort of holographic, fractalized picture of what the entire body is supposed to look like. So the fetus is growing into that form, and all of the initial forms are there. For instance, the these 12 meridians that circulate electromagnetic charged energy through them, called qi, that can be measured with a skin resistance graph that measures electromagnetic fields, communicates to the surface of the body as acupuncture points that can be opened or closed to their ability to lower their skin resistance to attract electromagnetic fields into the body, into the meridian channels to top up the energy. These meridian channels are extremely complex. They go deep into the body, surround organs, and come back out to another point. It's not just on the surface of the skin. These meridians go deep into the body, circulate around specific organs that are associated with that meridian, like the stomach meridian or the small intestine meridian or the heart meridian. This hypothesis suggests that genetic information in the genome is transformed into a three-dimensional body plan during development, involving chromatids forming a structure that directs cell information. What's a chromatid? This is a chromatid. Here's a chromosome. Chromatid is how the chromosome forms sister chromatids to make a duplicated copy of a chromosome. It's how cell division takes place. It's how you differentiate tissues. So, involving chromatids forming a structure that directs cell formation, with the Spearman organizer controlling brain and body development, and potentially linking acupuncture meridians to embryological processes and therapeutic innovations. Now, we've got two things here to unpack. Chromatids, which is how cells divide and copy, and pass on the blueprint information to the cells that is growing and differentiating out into the body that you're going to become as a fetus. And the other is a self-organizing principle called a Spearman organizer, somebody who's overseeing the construction plans of the blueprint, differentiating all what these chromatids are doing, how the body is expanding and growing out into the body you're going to become. This Spearman organizer is got three parts. There's a macro scale of organization of the body as you grow as a fetus. There's a mesoscale, a medium scale, and there's a micro scale. So there's three different nested vibrational models. And by the way, these are all linked together as fractal holograms based on harmonic and overtone resonant patterns, according to music theory. All of these things were nested standing wave patterns reflected in the macro scale and the micro scale throughout the whole body as a fractal hologram, as we'll see in just a second here. All of it mediated through the thalamus and the hypothalamus and the pituitary triangle. Upside down pyramid of Cheops, which is a recurring theme in the body. As a matter of fact, the pathways of information, of all of the information coming from my body, going up these tracks, various tracks in the spinal cord, on their way into the upper brainstem, into the thalamus, reach a certain place in the cortex where they cross over to the opposite hemispheres. For some reason, that is a big plan of how the universe works. Everything seems to cross over to its opposite side, right? This eye is processed in the opposite hemisphere back here because the fibers cross over at the optic chiasma. At the optic chiasma is right where the pituitary is, where these two, nerve lines of the optic nerve cross over. In the brainstem, where all this information of all these tracks cross over, weave through each other and cross over, where 80% go to the opposite hemisphere and 20% go straight, which, by the way, is the bell curve rule. 80% on the bell curve, 20% is not on the bell curve, 80% cross over to the other side, 20% go straight. 80% of my body is supporting tissues, 20% is, blood and bone and organs and glands. 20% is governing tissue, the central nervous system. 2% of that is the elite system that controls it all. That's thalamus, hypothalamus, pituitary triangle. In society, 20%, 80% of the people are supporting tissue. They wake up in the morning with an alarm clock and they drive to work through a traffic jam and come back at night and have the same dinner and watch television. It's a routine. Tomorrow is another alarm clock for the rest of your life. You make babies. You never think about a cosmic path or waking up or enlightenment or any of these kind of things that we talk about. That is 80% of supporting tissue. 20% don't do that. 20% is governing tissue. In society, that would be more like, big scale money, international business organizations who buy politicians and control government and legislation. You would think that government would be the controlling tissue, but no, it's one step behind that controls governments. And 2% of that controls really the hub is who knows what. Illuminati, Anaconda from Sirius, some other, race from another dimension. Who knows? But you can see that this bell curve thing of of 80-20, 80-20, 80-20, 80-20 repeats over and over and over again throughout nature. It seems to be one of those patterns that repeats. Like the Fibonacci series, a pattern that repeats over and over again. It's like the value of a circle. Pi is of supreme importance. And there's something about certain basic principles of math and music theory and harmonics and overtones and proportions that repeat over and over again throughout nature as another example of a fractal hologram, and all of it is reflected in miniature in my body as a textbook of universal law. So this Spearman organizer thing is organizing macro scales down to micro scales as fractal holograms of each other based on these same principles in the unfolding of the reading of the blueprint of the fetus that you used to be in an unimaginably rapid growth phase of cell division of these chromatids. So as the fetus is growing, it's conforming more and more to this blueprint, but all of the micro aspects in seed form are there, painted onto the body. So here's the fetus with all the meridians in place. The cycle and circulatory system of chi flowing through those is not established yet. That will come at some point. But first you build the pathways as part of the basic structuring of the growth pattern of chromatids dividing cells at an unimaginable rate based on an overriding blueprint that links the macro and the meso and the micro scales together stage by stage by stage as you become who you are. And remember, at 16 to 24 weeks, all the senses come online for the first time. I have my first experiences, and those are sound and vibration because you're in the dark, and so you can't see. Your nose and mouth are filled with fluid, so you can't smell, you can't taste. Sound and vibration. It's my contention that sound and vibration is food for the soul, food for the system that aids in the development. So an enriched environment by putting headphones on the pregnant belly and talking and singing and policing the sound environment, so you turn off the TV with murders and sirens and machine gun fire. You keep that out of the mix, and you play the great classics and the great composers and Indian music and popular music that doesn't disturb and all that kind of stuff. In acupuncture, also, there's this, fractal hologram thing where all of these meridians mapped out onto the body are also mapped out into the ear in miniature. It's called auricular therapy. Every point in the body is represented in the ear. Every organ, the brain, all the parts of the brain, the hands, the legs, the spine, all of it's in here in miniature with an acupuncture point in miniature. Laid out on the ear like a fetus, folded up as a fractal hologram. You can see how it's laid out. It's very complex. Auricular therapy charts are unimaginably complex, and they go on the backside of the ear as well. Somatotropic map, originally from Nogier, a French acupuncturist. Auricular zone system by CNS. Now, this guy Nogier really became the originator of modern auricular therapy. And his system was way more advanced than the average acupuncture use of sticking needles and little points in the ear, according to the sort of the standard that you see. We have points arranged in this various ways and organs on the inside of the ear, the spine along the ridge, things like that. Nogier developed a method of using laser, an infrared laser. So you can't see an infrared laser. The red laser you can see, the green laser you can see, the blue laser you can see. An infrared laser has an invisible beam, and therefore you don't have a problem with the sort of the red laser where 80% bounces off the reflection of the skin. 20% enters. So the infrared laser that he developed could penetrate most of the information. Reverse of that, 80% can go in, 20% bounces off. And he would shine that infrared laser through a series of colored filters. And these colored filters would reveal 7 different pages of points on the ear. So if I put the blue filter on, that's one set of points that has to do with the skeletal system. I pull that away and put the red filter on, and that's all the circulatory system in the heart. And I put another color filter on, and it's all the brain and the nervous system and the internal structures, and really a mind-blowing advanced system that he developed, the Nogier system. So his Nogier system of mapping points on the ear that translate out onto the body, where different colored zones here go to colored zones in the body, and had specific frequency resonances in hertz of this laser, which have gotten translated into sound frequencies that can stimulate those areas, where each of these areas is like, anabolism, anti-inflammatory, nutrition assimilation, movement functions, right, left sides. I mean, this is an amazing stuff. It could be a whole broadcast of its own. But bear in mind that this mapping on the fetus is also the central nervous system and the autonomic nervous system and the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. All of that stuff is being mapped as well. So the core control system is being constructed also based on these blueprint patterns from the master organizing system, the Spearman organizer, directing cell division into certain blueprint structural diagrams, sympathetic and the parasympathetic and the neutral, the homeostasis mode. All of it's being mapped. And it's being mapped, like I said, as a fractal hologram. Every point in your body is also on your hands. Every point in your body is also on your tongue. There's a whole, acupuncture way of analyzing your tongue. Every tooth is linked into a meridian, linked into an organ, linked into meridian points. In chiropractic, this is called neurological tooth. Each one has a spinal level, links to a meridian, links to organs and glands. So it means that, if an organ like the small intestine starts to get weak and the small intestine meridian gets involved, and the small intestine meridian will start to triage things. It'll triage maybe the muscle. There's muscle groups on each meridian. Now the muscles are associated with organs, linked together through the acupuncture system. So if the small intestine gets weak and certain points start to open up on the surface of the body to draw extra electromagnetic energy from the master field to top up the meridians so it can do the healing work for the small intestine, if that somehow is not enough and the meridian is losing the battle, then it will start to triage things in the body and cut them off and take their energy and throw it to the organ based on a survival striation list. Who's more important? Organ, gland. Who's least important? Muscle. We can do without the muscle. So let's flip the switch on the muscle and turn it off and pull that extra energy and throw it at the organ. And now we've got a weak muscle. And the weak muscles hold joints together. So now all of a sudden I've got joint pain. I've got chiropractic problem in a certain area of my body because the muscles aren't holding the joints together. I go to a chiropractor with a knee pain, but it's actually the quadriceps muscle that's on the small intestine meridian that got triaged because of some problem with the small intestine. And maybe it's not the quadriceps muscle that gets triaged. Maybe it's the tooth. Maybe it's the tooth that's linked to the small intestine and the here it is right here: heart, small intestine, circulation, sex. This tooth is the one that's going to get triaged. That's the reason why that tooth gets decay and not the one next to it. Right? Tooth decay in your mouth is because you've got weak fence lines for some reason. That's why that tooth is getting attacked, why its defenses are down. It got triaged because your system is not in balance. Is, fractal hologrammed into your feet, fractal hologrammed into your hands, fractal hologrammed into your eyes. Every organ and gland and system in the body, spinal, brain, meridians, all of it is in the eyes as well. All of it. All of these micro reflex systems throughout the body, this grand design of the fractal holographic system reflected in a miniature, flippant everywhere, just everywhere. As, like I said, a textbook of universal law, because that's how the whole universe is set up, that the universe itself is fractal hologrammed in repetition at different time scales and different, in sound, in different speed scales. You take human speaking, you speed up the recording, it sounds like birds. You speed it up, it sounds like crickets. You speed it up more, it sounds like dolphins. Crickets slow down, sound like birds. Birds slow down, sound like dolphins. Dolphins slow down, sound like people singing. It's like this fractal hologram, once again, except in speed scales or in size scales. The sound portion I just described, that's what I call primordial sounds. I use it actively in my therapy practice because, slowing these sounds down and making them unrecognized to rational mind wakes up unconscious mind recognition patterns. That's the part we're trying to be open. Oh, we're trying to open that part up. We're trying to slap it around and wake up, please, because that's where the healing center is, and that's where my deepest meditations are trying to get me to. Who knows how to grow my body out of 2 cells is the wise and ancient guru inside of me. Published in Neuron. Thalamic contributions to the state and contents of consciousness itself. The great cortico-thalamic system, the bidirectional signaling in the cortex, the thalamus, and underneath it, the hypothalamus at its core. Thalamocortical oscillations and brain waves. The thalamocortical, thalamus cortex relationship from these radiations of pathways coming from the different organelle divisions in the thalamus to each of the 2 hemispheres. But you can see it down here. This color is visual, this is body projections, temporal lobes, frontal lobes. I mean, the thalamocortical loops, the loops of information of this communicating out to here and from here coming right back down into here, out into the body or out into the hypothalamus, that's called a thalamocortical loop. The thalamocortical loops, which connect the thalamus to the cerebral cortex, are believed to generate and regulate brainwaves, especially alpha, beta, theta, and gamma. These oscillations are thought to play a role in cognitive functions, learning, memory, the firing patterns of thalamic neurons contribute to various brainwave frequencies associated with different states of awareness. For example, alpha waves are linked to relaxation and calm, meditation states, gamma waves, heightened focus, cognitive function, all of it originating from oscillations here transmitted into the cortex that put pressure on microtubules and create piezoelectric discharges that we read as brainwaves. And those discharges happen in synchronized, global synchronized events across the cortex, and the speed of those depolarizations are brainwaves, states of consciousness. The human thalamus is an integrative hub for functional brain networks. A transmissive theory of brain function, implications for health, disease, and consciousness. The same mediation areas of the thalamus, hypothalamus complex, radiating out into the gray matter, 6 layers of gray matter, 6 different brains stacked on top of each other, each with different brainwave frequencies, communicating within a layer and across layers, forms the unimaginable complexity of the sort of the bioquantum computer, where we never thought it was that complex before. Now we're starting to get an inkling of the power of the system. Broadcasting consciousness is something called the global workspace, which is basically a description that I have just been making. A global workspace that involves the 2 thalamus globular clusters linked to the hypothalamus underneath and the pituitary gland, with the radiation striations out to the gray matter, is the global workspace. The global workspace theory suggests that consciousness arises from highly coordinated, widespread activity in the brain. Now, we don't actually agree that this consciousness arises from these reactions, as we covered in the last live stream, that there is a consciousness arises in a universal field, and the brain is networked into that field as the hardware system that translates the waves of consciousness that use that system as a hardware system to organize the wave energy of consciousness in the universe into focused ways that it can be used, and in one sense become the most supreme way that the universe has devised of increasing entropy in the universe. So it's a from that standpoint, living sentient beings are the finest example of the machinery the universe has invented in order to increase entropy in the universe through conscious awareness and values of consciousness and the qualia of the experiences I'm having that we discussed last time, the redness of red and the wetness of wet, and the experience of myself existing, what that feels like as a unique experience for me. When consciousness is when signals are broadcast to a wider network of neurons across the cortex, the global workspace, we become conscious of sensations, qualia, all of that. The implications of this, that the broadcast value of setting up electromagnetic fields in the brain, and as we saw with the Dalai Lama's research at the University of Wisconsin, where these 30-year meditators' brain patterns were, high amplitudes of gamma brain activity associated with empathy, for all living things in the universe, links one gamma function to empathy, as we've discussed in the past. And there's another one is mu brain frequencies, which got elevated out of just mirror neuron activity in infants and young children learning socialization skills, and which is deficient in things like autism, to another level where exercising mu function exercises the mirror function with me and other people as a process of empathy. So mu and gamma now have to do with empathy, and that's a future project of research and probably a new soundtrack that I'm going to produce soon. But these electromagnetic field informations, the fact that there's high amplitude of gamma in these meditators, means that there is a possible function of gamma opening a door to higher levels of electromagnetic field energy from the universe itself that my body now can tap into and not be limited only to the storehouse of energy within my own system. That now I have a door I can open up and link to an infinite field of energy that can increase the broadcasting power of the electromagnetic field of my brain, theoretically with no limits. At least the fact that we know that the heart field, the electromagnetic field of the heart, extends 6 feet out in a sphere. And the brain is still hovering around the brain unless you can open that door. Now the brain expands and those two fields start to mingle, the heart-brain axis, through the autonomic nervous system. We're reading heart information in beat-to-beat space and electromagnetic field vibrations in hertz in the heart field to generate an HRV graph. And brain and heart are linked together because once we find a frequency that balances the autonomic nervous system, we can calculate octaves and come up with all these very specific brainwave frequencies for you. That links the brain function and consciousness with heart information through the autonomic nervous system, heart respiration or controlling autonomic function, or at least it's a two-way street where they're affecting each other, and brain waves. And that brings us to this whole idea of, resonant frequencies in the electromagnetic field that are interacting and modulating the electromagnetic field coming from the brain and coming from the heart field. These electromagnetic fields that are generating around the brain and the heart and the body are mingling and interacting with electromagnetic fields in the universe and forming a new type of interface that gives a new level of consciousness information that the system is utilizing to orient itself in the universe in a higher sense than just normal physical function. I'm orienting spirit in the amorphous non-physical universe energy fields. My deep level of consciousness is constantly orienting itself into the massive field. In a deep place of my consciousness, I know where I am and where I'm headed. Thalamic contributions to the state and contents of consciousness. The thalamic dynamic core theory of conscious experience. So the thalamic dynamic core theory of consciousness, the concept that consciousness is linked heavily into all the sensory information from trillions of sense nerve endings in my body, collecting every kind of sense that you can imagine having and some you don't even know about, all of them filtering up through the spinal cord and the brainstem into the thalamus switchboard, linked to the triangle of the thalamus, hypothalamus, and pituitary complex, and the pineal complex is all wired into that. With striations going out into the cortex brain in different regions, and the thalamus is generating the pulses that drive brain waves and link consciousness to this whole experience together. That's this thalamic dynamic core theory of consciousness. Coupling the state and contents of consciousness. One fundamental feature of consciousness is that the contents of consciousness depend on the state of consciousness. Here, we propose an answer to why this is so. Both the state and contents of consciousness depend on the activity of cortical layer 5 pyramidal L5P neurons. Layer 5 pyramidal L5P neurons. These neurons affect both cortical and thalamic processing, hence coupling the cortico-cortical, brain-to-brain, and thalamocortical loops with each other. So there's loops within the cortex itself, the gray matter, in those 6 different layers, and then the coordination with the thalamocortical loops, where the thalamus is projecting information out to the gray matter into the 6 layers of gray matter and receiving loops back. Functionally, this coupling corresponds to the coupling between the state and contents of consciousness, which we talked about last time. Qualia, state of consciousness, and the content of consciousness, the quality, right? The quantity and quality of consciousness, what they're talking about here. Together, the cortico-cortico and thalamocortical loops form a thalamocortical broadcasting system, where the L5P cells are the central elements. This perspective makes one quite specific prediction. Cortical processing that does not include L5P neurons will be unconscious. More generally, the present perspective suggests that LP5 neurons have a central role in the mechanisms underlying consciousness. Now, have you ever heard of the L5P neurons before? I had, but it was in a different context 50 years ago in school. We learned that there's 6 layers. And we learned that the sensory cortex, the noodles up here, and the motor cortex back here are different. That the motor cortex is the only place in the whole brain that has these specialized cells, the giant pyramidal cells of Betz. That is the origin of signals that come out of the brain that tell the body what to do. Everything else is processing information that comes into the brain and routing it around on the 5 different layers and back and forth with the thalamus and linked into the hypothalamus to modulate organ gland and meridian function. But only the pyramidal cells of Betz, called the giant pyramidal cells of Betz, that look different than any other neuron in the body, are in the 5th layer of the motor cortex only. That's what they're talking about here. Cortical layer number 5, giant pyramidal cells of Betz neurons, origin of consciousness, the L5P neuron. Cortical layer 5 pyramidal neurons, L5P neurons, the black-colored neurons in this image, play a central role in both cortico-cortical and thalamocortical loops. By being central to both loops, they effectively couple them together, functionally coupling the state and contents of consciousness. Coupling consciousness with its content. Qualia is what we're talking about here, coupling those two together. 2 types of thalamic projections are highlighted, specific and non-specific types of projections that have different cortical projection patterns. The grids on the thalamus are illustrative of the fact that thalamocortical neurons uh, with NSP types of projections, this here non-specific, can be found in different parts of the thalamus, the image, blah, blah. So here's the thalamus connecting up and down with these 5 layers. And the 5th layer has special significance of the consciousness processing aspect that the thalamus is exhibiting through putting pressure waves out that makes neurons fire in waves of depolarization that are associated with beta, alpha, theta, delta, gamma, epsilon, and all the rest states of consciousness. L5P neurons is the center in the gray matter of that process, conscious perceptions. Thalamocortical neurons, here's layer 5. There's the magic giant pyramidal cells of Betz, shaped like a pyramids of Cheops. Remember I talked about these fibers coming up into the brainstem where they first weave through each other to go to the opposite side, the 80-20 rule. The weaving process, when you look at it in a dissection of the brainstem, is called the decussation of the pyramids. Why is it called that? Because the weaving forms a pyramid, like the pyramid of Cheops, that is micro-reflected in the giant pyramidal cells of Betz in the 5th layer of the gray matter in the brain. This same kind of configuration in these cells is what we see in the decussation of the pyramids of all the sensory information coming from the body into the brainstem that crosses over in that region, 80% crossover to the opposite hemisphere. Is this brain cell your mind's eye? The researchers believe that L5P neurons provide a unique anatomical link between the state and contents of consciousness itself. Only brain activity involving L5P neurons enters conscious awareness. Pretty heavy. So this idea that raising our consciousness requires sympathetic and parasympathetic to enter into this very special state of homeostasis where I'm in a state of zero stress in the system, my ultimate safe place, my safe haven. From that place of zero stress and a feeling of ultimate safety, I feel comfortable to open all my doors and windows to the deepest part of what I am and who I am, to the cosmos. It seemed to me that that would be an absolute prerequisite for reaching the deepest state of meditation and consciousness that I'm trying to get to, that we have to stack things in our favor to make it possible. This is a requirement. Octaves of this that make this happen with the sound wave is specific states of consciousness that are unique to me. Center of the bullseye. That's where entrainment, any of those, causes a unique response that's not possible with a generic sort of soundtrack. It also means that when I'm in this position, energy is not being used for anything except controlling the system and balancing the system and making it tip-top in tune. And the more in tune it gets, the more energy is available to be used. It doesn't have to keep it in tune. That's more available to my thalamus to generate amplitudes that amplify the broadcasting of brainwaves and states of consciousness and expand my brain field out into the universal continuum and mix that brain field according to music theory and harmonics and overtones with the heart field. And the heart field is balanced and secure because the autonomic nervous system that controls both is in a state of zero stress and balance. So in this hypothetical state, we begin to influence everyone around us. We're influencing their brain fields and their heart fields. It's why you want to be in the presence of the enlightened ones, the master. You want to be close to the master because you're hoping it's going to rub off on you. And it's actually what's happening. It's not so much rubbing off on you. You are coming under the influence of a master metronome that you will synchronize with, and it will bring you up as close as you can get to their level of whatever processing your system is capable of. It's also using brainwave entrainment to entrain these fields in the presence of other people, which is, pretty much generating a massive heart-brain continuum field in the presence of large groups of people. In a sort of a more miniature way, that's what we are doing here together. Because we're not physically present together. We are aligning consciousness, which is in that field, and we're all linking into that extra physical field and meeting in another dimension, meeting in a non-physical dimension together. That kind of process of magnifying and amplifying our individual fields by linking ourselves together with brain entrainment that can calm the system and bring it more into balance so that this whole thing starts to spin, that's what these broadcasts are really all about. One thing I've learned myself from doing this broadcast is that balancing the autonomic nervous system is heavily influencing the thalamo-hypothalamic coordination and synchronicity that is linking consciousness with unconsciousness. So the big mind and small mind link themselves together through this matrix, all of it needing as a substrate zero balance, zero stress balance in the autonomic nervous system that opens the whole thing up to have access to larger energy fields for broadcasting consciousness, or at least expanding consciousness field into the big field that we're all part of so that we can all link up together and you can get access to new information and access to new abilities to influence that field. And with that being said, here we are with our headphones. So just to begin this, create a visualization that we are all linked up into this field, that this soundtrack is linking us together in this field, that our larger field of influence of consciousness extending out of our brains is linked into a larger field that we're all networked into. Then let it all go. So headphones, eyes closed, and here we go. Thank you all for being here with me. I'm going to leave the chat open for about 30 minutes, and then we'll all switch over to the Discord if we need to. Thank you all for being here. I am going to be in Boulder, Colorado all of next week, and won't get back until late Saturday. So I'm not going to be able to put together a broadcast for next week. I'll be gone at a big conference. So next Sunday will be a break. We won't be doing this, and it will be the week after. Until next time, I'll see you later, and I'll leave the chat open for about 30 minutes.